Hey, my name is Gustav Parker, and today I'll share my profound spiritually transformative experience while in an altered state at age 11. The experience began as a dream. My dreams had always been vivid, and some had been lucid. I had been having lucid dreams before my near-death experience, though at the time I didn't know what they were called. It's also worth mentioning that I had no idea what a near-death experience was. I had never heard of them, and had never heard of the term out-of-body experience either. I was 11 years old, and had grown up with no exposure to these subjects. As for lucid dreams, I simply knew that I would occasionally wake up in my dream, and while still in the dream, do whatever I wanted. This perhaps gives me a unique perspective in being able to judge whether a near-death experience is just a kind of dream, as some skeptics claim. It's also important to mention that my grandfather had just died, 3 days before my birthday, and that during the weeks that followed, I had often found myself actively imagining my own death. I was not suicidal, but perhaps at the age of 11, it was the first time death had seemed real to me, and I was curious. So curious, perhaps, that I wanted to know for myself what it was. Or maybe I missed my grandfather and wanted to find him. Here is how my experience begins. I was dreaming that I was on a grassy hillside. The rise of the hill was on my right, and it descended to my left. Then my dream became lucid. I chose to lie down in the grass and start saying that I wanted to die. I lay there and kept repeating it to myself. I just want to die. I just want to die. Figures appeared and began surrounding me, looking down at me. They kept saying to me, "No, you don't." And I kept saying, "Yes, I do. I just want to die." The dream stopped being lucid and continued on. I was looking at one of the local gas stations. Then I saw a circle. As I watched, a small line appeared at the top of the circle and began to cut into the circle, traveling down through the center of it, bisecting it. The instant that the line completely divided the circle into two halves, everything changed. Everything. My whole consciousness shifted, and I knew was no longer dreaming. A few words here about varieties of experiences other than that our ordinary waking lives. 1. Ordinary dreams. During an ordinary dream, I don't control the imagery. For example, I don't know why I dreamed about the local gas station, but this sort of unpredictability seems normal in dreams. 2. Lucid dreams. During a lucid dream, I know that I'm dreaming and can often control the imagery, but there is still sometimes an element of consciousness that is asleep in a way. For example, if I saw a friend during a lucid dream, I would sometimes tell them to remember the dream so we could talk about it the next day. I wouldn't realize that the friend isn't really there, and they are just part of a dream. 3. The near-death experience consciousness. The near-death experience consciousness is separate from both ordinary dreaming consciousness and lucid dreaming consciousness. I experienced that change of consciousness acutely during this experience. The change of consciousness that occurred when I shifted from the gas station dream to the near-death experience was as qualitatively different from the human dream state, both ordinary and lucid, as the dream state is from the daily awake consciousness. I realize that there is no way that I can convincingly communicate what this shift was like, and how I knew it was quite different from an ordinary dream. No skeptic would have any reason to be convinced by what I say, but that's not my purpose in writing this. I am writing this simply to share. So for a brief instant at the beginning of my near-death experience, I found myself on the bridge of the USS Enterprise. I loved Star Trek as a child. And then when that scenario faded away, I found myself in an enclosed sphere, or space, whose walls glowed. I immediately wondered if I had died. Since then, I've always wondered why I saw the bridge of the Enterprise, and not Jesus, the way some people do. And I think it's that, because of my age and my love for Star Trek, it symbolically spoke to me in a more immediate and meaningful way than if I had met the figure of Jesus. What did it symbolize? That I was no longer on Earth. I was fully conscious. I knew that I was supposed to be sleeping. I knew that I was no longer dreaming. I thought that I must have died. I was surprised that it was so sudden and easy. Most significant of all, I had 360-degree three-dimensional vision. This is not something I had ever imagined, heard of, or experienced. This, alone, told me that I was experiencing something new to me. I often read that skeptics, and even people who are more accepting, can't imagine how one can see without a physical apparatus, or how the blind can see in a near-death experience. Based on my own direct experience, I can explain how this is possible. My own experience was that I was actually not seeing. I tell others, who have asked me the same question, that the soul doesn't see. The soul, or our consciousness, is in all things and is all things. I wasn't seeing, so much as I was being what I wanted to perceive. If I wanted to look at a pine tree, I wasn't actually seeing the pine tree. I was or became the pine tree, from whatever perspective I chose to observe it. I could either see it as a tree or know it at the molecular level. Since I was also the tree, there was no limitation to my ability to perceive or know the tree. In fact, this is a better way of putting it. The soul, or the nub of consciousness that we become one with when we leave our bodies, doesn't see things, we know things. If we want to see a pine tree, we know it. We don't see it, as on earth we do with our eyes. Also, concepts like near or far are meaningless to the soul, because we are one with all things and all things are one with us. We see distant things with the same perfect clarity as nearby things, because there is no such thing as near or far. Those terms are only used to refer to the position of earthly things relative to each other. We don't see the spectrum of visible light. We know the spectrum of visible light, because this facet of the universe is no different from any other. I could see in all directions at once, front, back, left, right, up, and down. Strangest of all is that I could focus in all those directions at once. This is something that even now I have a hard time imagining. Next, the faint glow that had surrounded me faded away and I was in a black void. I was momentarily lost, then saw a faint pinprick of light grow steadily closer or larger. I was drawn toward it, or it toward me. I had no sense of relative motion. The light was beautiful, white, and just profoundly beautiful. I remember the moment it enveloped me. I experienced pure and unconditional love. I can't even write this without tears, but I won't be any better than any other near-death experiencer is at describing that love. I knew, wherever I was, that I never wanted to leave it. I didn't think in terms of going back, only that I didn't want to leave. While enveloped by the light, I was also shown, or made to understand, everything that had ever happened or would happen, and it all made perfect, beautiful, and flawless sense. Like so many others, I just remember how obvious it all seemed, and how perfect. The experience of being in the light is pure jubilation, joy, understanding, and love. Next, I found myself standing on a path. There was grass to both sides, and a small tree ahead of me. The path went around the tree to the right. I couldn't see what was beyond. There was darkness above, to left, my right, and ahead of me. I remember feeling lost. At this point, I started walking on the path and calling for my grandfather, who had just died. When I reached the tree that was more like a sapling, I felt something push against me. At the next moment, I was being sucked back into my body. I'll never forget that experience. I describe it as akin to a genie being put back into a bottle. I went from existing with complete weightlessness and experiencing this oneness with the universe, and all else that contained the universe, back to the bottle of my body. The experience really was like being sucked back into a small enclosure. I immediately sat up. I remember this with perfect clarity. I looked out my bedroom window and saw the first faint, dark purple hint of morning. I was in a cold sweat. The first time in my life I had ever experienced a cold sweat. It took me 7 years before I shared my experience. I shared it with no one. I was afraid to. Watch this video next about a man who had near-death experience due to head injury in fight.